Okay, now that our rod caps are loose, I can pull the caps off, making sure not to lose my bearing, fall out and bang on the floor. I'll make sure that stays in tight. Same thing for cylinder number 2, make sure that bearing stays in nice and tight. And now I can see the imprint left on the bearing surface or on the bearing itself. You can see the imprint left there by the Plastigage, and the same on this one. And now basically measure that, and obviously the wider the width, the less tolerance or the less gap that's there. So you can check that with the Plastigage container, which has that tolerance on it. And right now you can see that that one is about 2/1000 of an inch, and this one also is going to be about the same. You tear these containers in half so that you can get in there easier to check it and verify the width of that. Now you can see that it's wider than 3/1000 and not as wide as 1/1000. But you can verify those and see that they're about 2/1000 of an inch. And for me, again, most of the motors I put together, I don't like a real tight motor. I like it to ride on lubrication. So I want a little bit wider. I don't want to go quite as far as 3 unless I'm in a race motor and it's sitting running in 50 weight oil. If you're running in like 20W50 like I'm putting in this engine, then 2/1000 is a good clearance. 1/1000 is okay, but it gets that's pretty tight. Like I say, I like it to ride in the lubricant. So now I will go back. I will clean off this Plastigage, both off of the bearing surface and also off of the bearing itself. Again, you don't want to use nothing. Use your fingernail, but be very gingerly about how you're doing it. The bearing surface the crankshaft is steel, so that's pretty hard. You're not going to scratch that with your fingernail. But when you get to the bearing itself, you want to be very gentle on that. Now that one in some parts looks like it's almost 1/1000 of an inch. You don't want to scratch this surface. Very gently just get in there and clean all of that off. This again is a way to verify the measurements that you took with a micrometer are correct. So if they weren't, I have 2 options. One would be to replace the crankshaft. Another one would be to see what my measurements are and either put oversized bearings to take up the tolerance. And if I can't figure that out, I would take the crankshaft to, my case would be Terry's Engine Rebuilding in Green Bay. He'd mic it and return the crankshaft so that it would fit. At the bearing itself, they call it undersized, but it's actually the bearing is thicker so that the crankshaft is turned down 10/1000 and would have back to your original dimensions of approximately 1 to 3/1000. If he was going to turn it, he would probably turn it to 1/1000 unless you asked him differently. Now I'm ready to put it back together. So I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the journal surface so that everything's not all dry, and I will also put it on the bearing before I start to put everything back together. And now then again, I just go back through the same sequence that we just ran through. Bring them down snug. And then the three-step sequence of torquing, and then a final verification. Then at that point, I will turn the engine over so that the next pair of cylinders, 3 and 4, so that that crankshaft journal is all the way at bottom dead center, and I will start installing the number 3 and 4 pistons. And at that point in time, we'll run through all of these here. I'll probably speed up the process so you don't have to watch all of it. And then we'll move into the next step in the procedure. The bearing falls out like that because of tight circumstances and it doesn't want to go in. The last thing you want to do is try to force it in. Take it back apart, put the bearing back into the cap, and start over. Chances are you'll wreck the bearing if you just try to pound it down and tighten it up. You don't want to do that. Okay, now for taking your bearings apart after you plastigage them. You don't have to do it in 3 increments, but you don't want to go taking one completely loose and leaving the other one completely tight. So just take it down a little bit at a time till you get it loose. basically the same thing, but you don't need to use a torque wrench. You can use a regular ratchet. Just take it down slow. Then, once you get the nuts off, you can take the bearing caps off, which proves to be very tricky sometimes, as they're very tight. There's not a lot of clearance. And I mean between the connecting rod bolts and the bearing cap holes. So you've got to be very careful. And when you look here, you can see this tab on the bottom of the cap, and there's also a tab on the bottom of the cap on the opposite side. Those tabs are for removing those caps. So when it's in this position, you can get at the lower one with a screwdriver. If you put the screwdriver carefully on the bottom of that tab, catch the edge of that tab, and then hit it. You want to start out with the one that's on the lower side, because you got to rock it back and forth. You're never going to get it one at a time, and if you go too far on one side, you're going to have to tap that side back down. I just heard it click, so you got to listen to what's going on there. So that side moved. So now on the other side, and you can get under it with a hammer and a flat punch, and just tap on it. And now we went a little ways with that side, so now we got to pull up on the opposite side again. So we'll get under that side with the screwdriver again and go up a little bit. See how that worked back and forth? And there it came off. So that's how you take a bearing cap off. I'll do it again on the other side. Now, something you would definitely want to remember is you don't want to stick a screwdriver in here and pry between them two, because you mar the surface up. And all it takes is a little mark on that surface, and then when you pull your bearing cap down tight, it's not going to sit flat on that machine surface. So you don't want to be putting a screwdriver in between there. Just work it back and forth until you get it off, but always start on the low side of the rod. If you start on the high side, you're going to fight it the whole way. Always start on the low side. There it came. And there the other one is off. And then once again, now we can check our bearing clearances. And once again, we're in the 2000s range. And there's one that the ring slipped out of. So when it gets to that point, You can see there that little bitty oil ring keeper slipped out because the ring compressor was not down tight to the cylinder, to the block deck. So now I gotta loosen this back up, slide it back down, and get all of them rings back in there again, and then tighten it back down and do it over. That's just the name of the game. If you force it, you're going to break a ring, bend a ring. In any case, it will not be right. Do it right, or don't do it at all. And sometimes it takes a little more persuasion than a person would like, but it takes what it takes. So you gotta go back and forth in order to get it loose. A little bit at a time. Don't get discouraged. Just be diligent and as gentle as you possibly can be. Use a little piece of wood when you start pounding harder so you don't mar up the gasket surface. Almost put it on backwards. Hey, never pound on anything. Take your time and look at what you're doing and pay attention. That's the key. If it doesn't seem like it fits, don't force it. Stop, back up, look at it, verify what you have, and then move forward when you got what you know is correct. That's it. The crankshaft is installed. All the connecting rods and pistons, and everything rotates as it should, nice and smoothly. Hope you enjoyed this section of installation of pistons and rods and rod bearings.